Hello, 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 coaches and leaders. I have April Little on with me, and we are going to talk about burnout, but not necessarily burnout for your educators. We're going to talk about your burnout. We are checking in with you and your wellness. So before we jump into it, first, I wanted to welcome you to the show, April. I'm so glad you're here with us.
Becca, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here today.
Yeah. So, I would love for you to share with everyone what has been your journey within leadership. I know you coach leaders. Where did you start and what do you do now?
Yeah, so I've been in, so prior to coaching leaders, I've worked primarily in talent acquisition, in recruitment roles, and then staff talent acquisition roles. A role that I think many of your listeners will relate to is I did staff at Grand Canyon University, a lot of educators in those roles. And then I moved into tech recruiting and eventually worked my way to VP of HR. And the parts of my job as a leader that I enjoyed most was coaching my people. I didn't really enjoy, meeting the metrics for recruiting and HR. I really enjoyed helping to develop people. And so I knew that there was a misalignment there. And so there was always this tug to go off on my own. So for the past 2 years, I've been coaching leaders, experienced women and experienced leaders, women leaders that want to transition into leadership, top leadership roles.
Love it. And I something like sometimes I kind of hang out in these Facebook groups. And I hang out these principal Facebook groups, and sometimes people are kind of reach out to the groups around that. They say
Mhm.
they're usually like an assistant principal, and they'll say, "Oh, like I'm interviewing for a principal job. Any tips?" Right? And so I know someone like you could be really helpful to folks wanting to interview for kind of a higher position.
Absolutely. One of the things that I love to do right now, what I'm finding that's working across the board, especially even in education, is storytelling. There's a
Mm.
lot of volume. Hiring teams are seeing unprecedented volume. So it's not just enough to just answer the question and satisfy it. You need to be memorable. And part of that is framing everything, sharing the details you're comfortable with, sharing that story about maybe other educators or teachers that you've worked with in those answers.
Ooh, that was such a great tip. What
Yeah.
what a great. I hope those of you looking to
Yeah.
interview for a higher position wrote down that tip. Okay, great. Well, thank you. That's not even what this episode's about.
Yeah.
We got a freebie. Okay, so we are going to talk about burnout today, right? Because we need to be, I mean, I experienced burnout as a teacher twice. Two different years.
Wow.
And so yeah, and so I want to talk we're going to talk about burnout as a coach, right? Because we want to check in with all of you coaches and leaders, all of you listening, like how are you doing, right? We're just coming we're recording this coming off of kind of a holiday break, and this won't air until months later, right? So I want to acknowledge this is something that's on my mind now. Those folks that have gotten a break, and when you actually hear this, you'll be deep into kind of coming into almost testing season. So this is a very real thing that I want to check in with folks about. So I'd love to hear from you, April. What are some signs of burnout that you've experienced as you've coached folks?
Some of the top signs that I've seen is that people simply lose their passion to do their
Mm,
jobs.
mm.
They're struggling to be happy on Sunday evenings. They're making mistakes at work, really simple mistakes. And I'm not talking about human mistakes, I'm talking about just regular mistakes that kind of show that maybe their mind is elsewhere.
Yep.
Never feeling like they're getting enough rest and feeling like their work life harmonization. That's the other one that I notice. There's no work life harmonization. There's always something to do because they're lacking focus. And so the work tends to travel with them like a cloud over their head.
Wow, I've never heard that term work-life harmonization. We always say in education work-life balance, which I did an episode called Work-Life Balance is Bullshit. And so I really love that term harmonization, and it really makes me think of my company name, The Whole Educator. We are a whole
Yeah.
human and we want to harmonize that work, inside and outside of work life, right? Because we're
Agreed.
one human experiencing all of it.
I'll just add there too, Becca, that I have found that some people really try to get their work done by the end of the day, and that could actually burn you out too. I know that we hear the calls to leave work at work, don't bring it home. But what I have found to be most effective, even for myself, and now I share it in my coaching practice, is I was working 8 to 8 a lot. And I work 8 to 8 a lot now. And it's because I integrate cooking dinner, I integrate getting up from my desk versus trying to get it all done and be done at 5.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, really squeeze it in, like, I imagine you're going to tell us all the things, but I could imagine like taking breaks throughout the
Yeah.
day and not trying to, just I'm like only working during these hours and then I'm not working. Um, could really be helpful for our mental health.
Yeah, I think so too.
Mhm.
I don't know that we're designed to just sit there and get things done right at 5. And it was actually an old mentor of mine. I noticed that her light was green one night, this many, many years ago. I'm like, why is it that you don't seem stressed out at work? And she's like, because I integrate my life. If I want to go to jazzercise during the day, I'm going to do that because I know I'm going to come back and have my client call.
Love this. First of all,
Yeah.
Jazzercise still exists and someone is still going, and that makes me so happy right
Someone's
now.
still going. Yeah.
Jazzercise. And what do you mean her light is green?
So sorry, I should have specified. At that time, I was using Skype. Skype has now been replaced by Microsoft Teams and,
Zoom.
Slack. But
Mhm.
at that time, my mentor at the company I was working at, she just always came across very cool, calm, and collected and composed.
Mhm. Okay, and
And
that's what you
there's a
mean by
reason.
so when you say your light is green.
Yeah, I was like, I noticed that your light's green. You're working, right? And you're
Oh, I
working at
see.
7,
Like
8 o'clock. Yeah,
the
yeah,
little signal that someone's online.
yeah.
Oh,
It was
okay,
a
I see
signal
what you're
that she was
saying.
online. So I'm like,
Okay.
how are you doing that? And I see that it's 7 o'clock and you're green. And she's like, because dinner's cooked. I already read to my kids and I'm finishing up this last report. And so that's when it opened my eyes that there was a different way of working versus trying to burn yourself out and finish up at 5 too.
Oh, that's so interesting. Okay, so I would love to hear what are some ways folks can uh I think there's like a couple things. There's the proactive and the reactive around burnout, right? There's like how can folks avoid being burned out and then how can folks heal from feeling burnt out? I'd love to
I think
hear both.
there's a few things about being proactive with that. Part of that is people pleasing. And it often
Oh,
hides.
I'm so happy you're talking about this. Say more.
And if you have if you have you obviously have educational leaders listening to this podcast as well. People pleasing does hide in servant leadership.
Hmm. Ooh.
And so that means that you're happy to help your team and to take on that work versus helping them maybe calibrate the ideas. So then you take it on, or you find yourself constantly saying yes to things. That's it. It's capacity load. So the first thing to start recognizing is, can I build in a repeatable system to ensure that my capacity load is sustainable? And for many people, it's taking on more work and flipping more lights green. So if you were to put all your work as a traffic light, green is what you're working on, yellow, you might work on that. Sometimes red is on pause. You're constantly flipping things green. And I actually work with my clients on this. They actually have a traffic light. So when we're going to their boss to say, hey, you gave me a new task. What would you like for me to flip from green to yellow so I can take it on? It's starting to balance the capacity load and to delegate more. And delegating could even happen when you're an individual contributor. And part of that is really saying, here's what I can work on, here's what I can't right now, or this person's better suited. But that is the number one thing that I see, Becca, is that people are taking on more and more work. They're saying yes, they're hoping it's going to pay off. It doesn't. It does pay off. It pays off in burnout. But
Payment
that is
is
the
due.
payment is due. And then it becomes really hard and they become resentful a little bit
Uh-huh.
of the fact they're missing soccer games with their kids. They can't watch their favorite TV show. They're eating takeout again for the third night in a row because they can't cook a fresh meal. And that is the number one root cause, is that when I'm working with someone, they do not have work-life harmonization. They don't have a capacity load. Their capacity load is just all over the place.
Okay, there's a couple things I want to highlight that you said that I want to make sure folks like really hear. One is I love kind of categorizing the to-do list as green, yellow, and red. Love that. Like I saw it visually on a nice little Excel sheet.
Yeah.
And really like acknowledging, and that is an activity I do with coaches. Let's acknowledge all the things you are doing because it is in your head. But let's
Mhm.
see it down on paper first, right? And kind of categorizing what am I doing now? Green. What am I doing? What am I doing? Is it later? Is yellow?
Yeah. Yeah. So yellow could be maybe something that you're not working on every week. That might be a monthly report that you run
Oh,
that you're
gotcha.
still in charge of.
Okay.
And maybe the red is it's just docked and maybe
Pause.
not working on it. It's
Right. When I
paused.
have time. Right. I got that. Okay. And then I also heard advocating. Right. So getting there's like and there's something around advocating for ourselves that's super important. And I think getting clear language around what is happening and the impact on us, right? And I use
Yeah.
that language a lot when I'm coaching coaches and leaders when they're communicating to someone else. The impact on me is ba ba ba, right? And so when we can document clearly what we are doing, right? And we're given another task to communicate to our boss and say the impact on me is, I think could be super powerful around advocating for ourselves.
I would agree with that. And I love that you use the word impact. That's so important. It's to say, okay, if I take this on, here's the areas that it affects. And I also think, just as a side note, this is you being strategic with your time. You're being a strategist. This is how you're saying,
Yep.
this is how this is going to impact different functions within the system in which I work in.
Yep. Really
Now,
great.
I will also say that the approach I take with leaders who want to get promoted is that when you bring something up to your boss to advocate for yourself, it should not be amongst your standard one to one because their mind's already in different places. And so, anytime you want to advocate for yourself, you send a signal to someone that this is really important when it's a single subject meeting.
Oh, that's so powerful. Don't tag it onto another meeting that has a totally different intention.
That has a totally different intention. Their mind's still on the 27 things that you just went over. And then,
Mhm.
when you get to that, they're like, yeah, sure, we can help. But then there's no actual reinforcement to make sure that you're successful in that most important ask that you just asked. And so I always say start off with that. And when you have something tangible, Becca, like that traffic light system, so they can visually see what you're doing too, because there is something called the spotlight effect. They don't realize how busy you are sometimes. They don't know what you're working on. So you do have to own your desk like a CEO and say, I am working on this. Happy to take it on. What can we flip?
I love that. What can we flip? I love that language. And what is the spotlight effect?
The spotlight effect is something that I actually heard first from Sahil Bloom. I don't believe he came up with the term, but he posted on his Instagram years ago, and it always stuck with me that we are more important to ourselves than we are to anyone else. And yes, we're important to other people, but our interest, our boundaries, that is most important. That's housed with us, and we have to start caring about that.
Mm. Ooh, I love that. Okay.
Basically, to
Oh,
summarize, it means that nobody's thinking about you as much as you are, especially in the workplace.
yes, I love that. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Okay, so what are other strategies you have for folks around being proactive for burnout to avoid burnout?
The next one is to start delegating, especially for leaders. So, I know we talked about kind of self delegating and pausing, but the next one is starting to actually delegate based off of your team strengths and not desk dumping, because then you are creating a cycle of burnout by just desk dumping and not having real intention for the work people are doing, because that context switching could cause more burnout for them too. So, it's starting to get to know your team and starting to let things go that maybe you could quickly calibrate on and look at before it's bubbled up or before it's delivered to whoever it's going to, but you're not actually doing the work. It's starting to put yourself in a position to oversee maybe how the work gets done, but you're not doing it. That's the second proactive approach, is that chances are as a leader, you are not delegating enough, but also being mindful as you delegate that it aligns with your team's work stream. So you're not transferring
Hmm.
your stress to them too.
Hmm. I love that. It makes me think of in the Speed of Trust, Stephen M. R. Covey, he talks about the 13 high trust behaviors that he found out through
Mm,
research. And the last one he talks about is extend trust. And that's not blindly trusting people. It's often when I run this in workshops, people are like, I'm just supposed to blindly trust them. No, no, no. It's you vet people, right? Like you extend trust to people that appear trustworthy to you. But this is a big one around delegating, giving up control of all the things you're
yeah,
doing and uplifting people to have more leadership. Like, I believe that people around me want to have more leadership of, I don't know, experiences, let's say. And so trusting other people to do some of the work that I don't have the capacity to do.
yeah,
Right.
yeah,
And watch, we're not, again, not blinding, just not like, okay, go for it. Good luck. Like, I might need to build capacity. I might need to train someone before I have them do
yeah,
that task. Right. So I'm doing it responsibly. But what's cool is it not only helps to avoid burnout for me, it builds trust with that other person.
yeah, it sure does. And I think that you're starting to touch on something else too about training them up. It's so important to make sure that you have SOPs because if you are listening to this and you're a leader and we're talking about burnout, but also you're probably a high potential. So that means maybe you're on somebody's 9 box review right now, potentially for a promotion, or you're vying for one. You want to start getting in the habit of delegating and having those systems in place for yourself, and replacing yourself. And I do believe that it is a leader's job to create more leaders. Never forget that.
Hmm. And I want to define SOP is not a term we use often in
Oh, I'm sorry.
education. So it's a standard operating procedure, correct?
Yes, just some type of system for repeatable success. So if you take
Yeah.
yourself out of the equation, someone else can step right on in and do it because that is one of the biggest roadblocks is I don't have time to write down what I do. So I just need to do it quickly.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, that's really great. And I keep hearing this kind of this pattern and this theme of creating structures for ourselves, right? Not just kind of willy-nilly, like I arrived to work and I'm running around putting out fires and then I go home exhausted. But like, how can I create systems and structures for myself so that things are kind of working on their own almost without me having to operate all of it? And that does involve being willing to not have my fingers in everything and feel like I
Yeah.
have control over everything.
Yeah. I do want to bring something else up that I think some of the listeners will definitely relate to. That when you have put yourself in this position, you do have to reintroduce yourself. I'm
Mm,
aware of that when especially when we're dealing with things like burnout. And there are things that you've done that contributed to that burnout that maybe bring other people comfort.
mhm,
And that
mm,
could be the fact that somebody could be listening. They're saying, well, April, that's nice, but I can't delegate to anybody. And that could be because you've trained your leader or your skip level that you're going to be the person delivering the work,
mhm,
starting to retrain them too. And you just said about Stephen Covey's about, you don't have to trust people right off the bat. I think that's really important. A good friend of mine calls it trust and verify. There are
yes.
things that you could start doing to verify that somebody could actually do the work before you go ahead and just give them the work.
Yes, I love this. Okay,
Yeah.
are there any other big tips for being proactive around burnout?
So some other tips that I have that I can share, at least now that we're entering sort of the personal side, is I am a believer, and this might be unconventional advice, to obsess over something. So let me explain. It means that if you have things that you can rely on to keep you healthy, so that could be that might be your favorite meal. Instead of feeling like, okay, I need to make this different thing, it's starting to create sort of and we're not talking about executive presence here, but it's creating a uniform for yourself, some type of uniformity to help you to start having some predictability. So that way you're taking care of your whole self. And I realize that maybe going to the gym won't do that for everybody, especially as you're dealing with that. And I do think that's helpful. But I think part of it is starting to say, you know what? I need to start taking care of myself. So I'm going to start having some fixtures in my rituals at home. That could be turning some music on. That could be having maybe the same kind of meal and you remix it. And those are some ways to start phasing out. Those are some ways to ensure that you're preventing that burnout. So you're creating capacity later when it's time to just be you. So I'm not saying to live your entire life in a uniform, but I think that those are some things that you can start to do is to create repeatable systems even at home.
Yes, and and I'm thinking about the listeners. A lot of folks listening have families, right?
Yeah,
So it's we're we're taking care of folks at work and taking care of families at home, and I think having important conversations with the family to create that system together.
I agree. And I don't know whether we leave this here, but I would also say this might sound privileged, but if you can outsource certain tasks, and what I mean by that is if you can outsource just cleaning on Saturdays. I once had an old leader who had someone to come over and wash the walls and wash all her sheets because that gave her a fresh reset to smell fresh sheets.
Mhm.
And it was a nominal kind of cost for her, right? So I'm not saying to get a chef, but it's if you can outsource something and it might feel expensive, it actually gives you more capacity to be creative, to maybe even make that back in some other way, even if it's non monetarily.
Love this. This is so great. Okay. I love this. Okay. Any other ways that folks can be proactive with burnout?
I would say proactive is also starting to recognize the signs of, oh my God, I am sort of operating in the gray right now. It's a gray cloud. It's sunny out. Okay, and I see what those things are. It's starting to resent extra work being put on your desk when it used to light you up. And it's starting to recognize when that happens so you can jump in and take care of it because we all know prevention is the
Mhm.
cure. It's the best cure.
Yes. Oh, I love this. I want to highlight something, I think something that has been those folks that are watching the YouTube, you just saw me roll my eyes. And I think there's a misguided conversation education on self-care where it's like, go get a manicure or like I don't know, go to a movie. And it's like I love that you said none of that. I love that because that's kind of surfacey things. Yeah, they're enjoyable, but burnout isn't just being tired. Burnout isn't just having an upsetting day, right? Burnout is something very real and it is continuous and it colors everything. And so
Yes.
I really love that you have named things that are kind of impact the context of our life continuously, rituals continuous, right, habits continuous. It's not just once in a while getting a manicure. And so I want to highlight that you haven't said those things, and I really
Yeah.
appreciate that they feel very kind of root cause um appropriate, really touching
And
on that.
if I can add, Becca, I have clients that I work with right now that also have therapists because I
Mhm. Really
focus on
great.
the career aspect. And so some of that does come in our coaching. And what I know to be true is that you can't out vacation burnout and you can't out eat it
Yes.
healthy and you can't go see Wicked and feel better. You can't do any of those things. You are
Yeah.
going to have to get radically comfortable
Get
and really
therapy.
confront the thing. And so it just does not, it won't solve the problem.
Love
I
this.
wish it were possible, but you just can't
Yeah.
do it.
Oh, I love this. Okay, good. So now I want to talk about folks that are currently experiencing burnout. What what can they do to get out of burnout, to heal?
I actually want to go back to something that you mentioned a little earlier in the episode that you do with your clients. And it's
Hmm.
something that I do similarly with mine during a grounding session is to write down everything that you're responsible for
Hmm. Hmm.
because there's clearly a burden of tasks somewhere that's
Hmm.
starting to happen and it's starting to get really comfortable because and I like to say this as a business owner, I feel like my business operates in my head. Sometimes our career operates in our head and sometimes our career life system operates in our head and you're not really sure why. And part of it is you're almost embarrassed to even say that you are burnt out because you haven't written down everything that you do. You're like, well, my life is pretty simple, right? I just go to work and I'm coming home and I have to go get the kids and I have to cook dinner. I shouldn't be burned out, but I think it's important to realize that every action has probably four process steps next to it.
Hmm. Mm,
But starting to look at how much of this is mine to carry.
yeah. Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
Ooh, yeah. Oh, I love that. And it makes me think of like I once had a computer that died. And I was like, how could it die? It's supposed to do a computer thing. And it was running. So there was like some operating system that was running even when it was closed. And I thought it was shut down, but it wasn't shut down. It was just running all the
Yeah.
time and overheating. I think it killed a fan. And it makes me think of that, right? So we think, oh, I'm gone from work, the stress is stopped or paused, if I'm feeling stress at work. And that's not the case. Our brains are still
Yeah.
operating and thinking through what we have to do, experiencing the stress. Just because we left the
Yeah.
stressful environment doesn't mean we're not experiencing the stress, right? As long as we're thinking about it, we're experiencing that stress still. So it's still kind of running in our head, even if we're not doing it.
I agree. It's constantly thinking about things. I like to say it's constantly having just these checklists going off in your head. I like to describe, I think it's fitting for the podcast today, that when I'm dealing with clients that have experienced burnout, what we're doing when we're trying to put something in place to cure it at that time is I like to think of it as a mental bookshelf, and the bookshelf just got knocked over and we need to organize and refile.
Ooh.
That's what happened. All your books are everywhere,
Hmm.
and we need to get them organized back on the shelf. And it's not easy to do that. And
Hmm.
I think leading into the next question, the next piece of advice that I offer is getting a trusted resource to start talking through this with, because I think that we come from this culture. If I were to talk about baby boomers, Generation X, millennials, Gen Z, we all have people in our lives, especially when we talk about some of those older generations, that you just get through it.
Hmm.
And that's why it's so important. And that also has transcended a lot of our generations too. Like, oh, I just this is just the price of living.
Hmm.
That's not true. This is not the price of admission. It's important to get a trusted resource that can offer you an unbiased opinion. And I don't know that that's our friends because we don't want to unload on them, but
Hmm.
that
Yep.
could be some type of mentor, a therapist. I think it's important to work through this with someone as well.
For sure. I have in my life definitely had multiple therapists, and I always have a coach. I've never had a time in my life where I haven't had a coach. I currently have a coach, and he is wonderful and helps me sort out the books in my life that have fallen off the
Yeah.
shelf, and I'm like, where do they belong?
Yeah.
And and I get to achieve my goals with him and be empowered and all of that. And so I think life coaching also, like, if I think
Yeah.
there's definitely a place around, I think therapists are hugely impactful, and also life
Yep.
coaching. And so just finding the right professional to help you think through what is actually happening, because often what we've
Yeah.
made up in our minds to the point of burnout isn't what's actually happening.
Yeah, that's so true. And I love that you brought up life coaching too. Um, I I believe that a coach should have a coach. You should always
Yeah.
be trying to get 1% better by being coached by someone who's also likely being coached, and that creates that whole circle of innovation. So if you can get a life coach, who are often sometimes even more accessible than a therapist, especially when we start having insurance enter the chat,
Hmm.
that might be the fastest way for you to also get assistance too, is to find a trusted life coach.
I love it. And what other tips do you have for those that are experiencing burnout right now?
I think the other thing is, so once you prioritize and you start to look at everything that you have, maybe you also get a resource to look at that with you. It's starting to look at, what do I work on? There is going to have to be an immediate cutout for you to start doing it. You're not going to be able to treat the burnout and you're still working on all 72 tasks that you have to do every day. You
Mhm.
will have to start to prioritize, and some of that stuff just won't get done. And I think that there is a releasing,
Mhm.
mental releasing that has to happen, because certain things just won't get done every day.
Mhm.
Doesn't mean it won't get done. It's just that you're operating your life with the cup full, whereas the cup half full every day is still consistency.
Yeah.
So it's starting to look at that too. And also, for anyone on here who is spiritual, it's finding the thing that governs you.
Mhm.
what governs you? What in your morality code do you have that kind of centers you? And starting to get really comfortable with that too.
Hmm. Yes, I
Reconnect with,
love that.
yeah.
And so,
I always say, so in my coaching, I'll tell people step outside of logic.
ooh, that's powerful. Step outside of logic. Ooh, I love that you said that. That's really great. So I actually want to add one more thing that I have experienced for myself and helped others through with burnout is sometimes the way we think about things can shift us out of burnout. And what I mean by that is it's when I lead my academy, one of
Yeah.
my modules is around facts versus interpretations. And
Mm,
there's the facts of what's happening, who, what, where, when, right? That is like undeniably a table's a table, right? And then there's our perception and our interpretation. And sometimes the way we interpret a situation, this isn't always the case, but sometimes literally the way we interpret a situation, like she's out to get me, can cause burnout. And something I've seen when I when folks go through my academy, sometimes I have people that lose weight. Like the academy is not for weight loss, but they
yeah.
feel so unburdened by the interpretations they've been having in their life. I had one person lose, I think, 50 pounds.
Oh,
And
wow. That's amazing.
I've had a couple people start businesses because when we can get empowered around our interpretations, sometimes that can literally shift how we're experiencing life. The things that were stressing us out suddenly aren't anymore
Hmm.
and can help us shift through that. And I'm not saying that's all the time, um, but it can really help. Like
Yeah.
literally learning how to view life in a different way.
And I love that one because of all the options, the fastest way to potentially cure a situation that you're in is a perspective shift.
Yeah.
And like you said, it's not necessarily for all situations. And I do something similar with limiting beliefs, putting them on trial. Is there
Yeah.
credence? Is
Mhm.
there not? And so I love that you do that in that way
Yeah.
too.
Yeah, it could be super helpful. So I wanted to share that with everyone else as well. Like, we and have a professional help you do
Yes,
that, please.
yes.
So I love that. So thank you so much for being here and sharing your expertise with everyone. I think this is super helpful, and I love your perspective on what causes burnout and the things we can do to be proactive and even reactive around burnout. I
Yeah.
think it really starts to get at the root cause of what's happening here. So if folks want to find out more about what you do, how to get in touch with you, where can they find you?
I am primarily on LinkedIn. So you can find me. My name's April Little. So if you search me on LinkedIn, you'll find me there. I do have a very light presence on Instagram, and I plan on being a little bit more active on Instagram in 2025. And you can find me there as well.
Okay, what's your name on Instagram?
Oh, I should say that. I am April Little.
April Little. Oh, awesome. That's
Yeah.
fantastic. All right, good. So thank you again for being here and sharing all these
Thank you
awesome
for
tips.
having me. I think this is such a great conversation, and I've been really wanting to have it. And so I appreciate you having me here today.
I love it.